Hello, and welcome to a special Saints and Sinners edition of Out with Dan. Today, I'm excited to talk to multi award nominated and Lambda Literary Award winner, Greg Herring. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
So I see that, thank you. I tried to count up. I see that you're way over 30 novels. You've been a prolific writer. Have you been writing your whole life?
Yeah, I started writing when I was in grade school. I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't really start taking it totally seriously until I was in my 30s and trying to actually pursue it until I was in my 30s. And I've just not stopped since I started, really. I take
I
a year
love
off
that.
every now and then.
I love that. Well, so I see that you have two series characters, or I would say recurring. You have Scotty Bradley and Chance McLeod. Give us an idea of who they are and what they do.
Well, they're very different. Um, The Chance books are kind of on hiatus. I'll probably write another one at some point, but I just haven't found anything that I thought would be interesting for him. Chance is a more dark series. It's more noirish, hard-boiled. There's some humor in it because apparently I can't help but write funny. I don't know what it is. I'll do readings and people will laugh, and I'm like, You're not supposed to be funny." But Chance is very dark, and he's a private eye with a very bad past. He's had a lot of trauma in his life, and so he's not as much fun to write as Scotty. Scotty is in the Scotty series. I lean into the craziness and wackiness and the humor of New Orleans, and he's a former stripper, personal trainer who now is in a throuple and lives in the French Quarter, and crazy things happen to him all the time. The very first book, when the series started, in the very first book, he was actually stripping at the Bourbon Pub in the French Quarter for Southern Decadence weekend, and he gets involved in something that just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And those are a lot of fun things. That's a fun series to write, but it's harder because Chance is very orderly and anal, and so when I write the books, I'm very anal and structured when I write the books. But the Scotty books, I just need three things. It's like three different things, and if I have three different things, then I can figure out how to work them into a story. That's how and then I just freeform it from there.
Oh, I love it. That must tickle both sides of your brains to write characters that are so different like that.
Well, it was nice because writing the Chance books takes me to a dark place. And sometimes I used to say that Chance was my excuse for drinking. And uh, so I would alternate them. So I would write a Chance book, and then I would be in a really dark headspace. And then it's like, okay, now I need to do something light and funny and get that energy out of my head. And so I would work on a Scotty book. I haven't done a Chance book in almost 10 years, but I have an idea for one, and I'm just not really sure how to do it quite yet. And when I figure that out, I'll go ahead and write it probably. People keep asking, so I probably should at some point.
Well, and I think that must be a very rewarding thing for an author when people say, "Oh, when's the next one coming out?"
Mm.
Because they identify with those characters.
Yeah, I'm always flattered when anyone reads one of my books for any particular reason, even if they don't like it. Um, I don't have a problem with negative reviews. I've never have. I have a problem with ones that are not constructive. It's the ones that I call I got this is how I think of them now. They used to negative reviews used to bother me, and then back in the olden days, your publisher would send you print copies of
Oh,
reviews.
lovely.
Yeah. And so I got one. My editor sent me one, and I opened the envelope, and there was a sticky note on it. And he goes, "Well, this one reeks with the stench of failed author."
I love that editor.
And ever since then, that's how I've kind of looked at the bitchy reviews. I don't like reviews that are, see how much smarter I am than the author, and then they spend all their time just trashing the author with no basis in anything. And it's like, if you're gonna be negative, give me something I can use.
Well, precisely. You know, one thing, I'm very fortunate with directions. So occasionally I'll read something and I'll say, okay, you might not have been at that intersection because you can't turn left. I mean, it's, but I'm never going to tell you that, because what will you get from that? All I need to do is, so when I think as a reader, we have to sort of suspend our belief or
Mhm.
disbelief, ever how you say that, because we have to go along with the story. I'm not there to be your editor. I'm there
Right.
to lose myself in what you're giving me.
Well, the thing with, I always think is that kind of thing, that doesn't bother me. That's just a mistake, you know. It's turning the wrong way at an intersection that you can't turn that way, and that's just a mistake. It's very weird for me because I have two different mentalities about this stuff, because I live in New Orleans. And it was made very clear to me very early on when I moved here almost 30 years ago that the one thing you cannot do when you're writing about New Orleans is is to get things wrong. You can invent something. You can invent a fictional street, you can invent a fictional house, a fictional address, you can do a fictional business, you can do all of that stuff, but you better make sure that the streets run the right way. You better make sure that anything that's real in the book is accurate. So that causes me trouble when I'm writing something that's not set in New Orleans, because I keep forgetting that you can make stuff up.
True,
It's
true.
fiction. And I don't know if people in other cities are as protective of New Orleans as New
I,
Orleanians are.
I don't. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think so. I think maybe outside of New York, probably not.
Maybe,
I think most of us who go to New Orleans and fall in love with New Orleans, it's sort of like the holy mecca for us. You know, it's
mm,
like, oh, okay, so this is something that I'm going to go and be absolutely crazy in this city, but you can't trash mouth it, because I'm going to be offended, because I think
right.
most people that go there end up loving New Orleans. So, what's a big difference for you between being a writer and an editor? Because I know that you edit a lot and you work with Saints and Sinners. So, let's talk about editing and talk about the short fiction for Saints and Sinners.
Well, editing is something that I call myself the accidental editor, because I did not really ever expect to ever work as an editor and be an editor. It just kind of happened. I was hired with absolutely no background. No background whatsoever in this.
Learn on the job experience.
But at the same time, I'm highly organized and efficient. I'm a little bit type A with with an element of procrastination, laziness thrown in, which makes the other stuff even more stressful. But I was hired to be the assistant editor of the Lambda book report. And basically, that was where I learned how to start editing. And it kind of was funny, because I had already sold my first book, and I was talking to my editor while I was working there about something else, and we were talking about, and I made a comment about something, and he said, "Oh, you should do an anthology." And I was like, "I don't know how to edit." And he goes, "Oh, it's not as hard as you might think it is." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And and they offered me money, so I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I learned with that first anthology a lot of stuff, and then I started reading anthologies more, to get a better idea of how they're put together and what works and what doesn't work and why did you put them in this order and that kind of thing. And really, when you're doing an anthology, I asked a really good, I asked a legendary editor in New York who I had worked with on. He was the editor of a literary publication Lambda put out at the time called the James White Review, and I was kind of his assistant also. And he was very famous. He discovered Sarah Schulman and Christopher Bram and people like that when he was working in
Wow.
from one of the major publishers in the 60s and 70s. And I asked him, I said, what's the trick to editing an anthology? And he just looked at me and said, work with good writers. And I was like, oh, and that actually is kind of true. And one of the things that I've learned over the years as an editor doing anthologies is that it's much easier if you find if all the stories don't need much work.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think that must be the joy of
Mm,
receiving some, some submissions for potential publication. When a good writer brings you a good story,
mm.
then it just makes it so much sweeter.
Yeah, it's really nice, and I always had a pool of writers that I trusted to do good work that I also considered friends, and I was just like, okay, I need you to write a story about that, and this is what the theme is. Just this is what it pays. This is when I need it by. Go. And that makes it a little bit easier. That makes it a lot easier, actually. I like to use established writers, and I also like to use new writers who don't have a lot of experience or a lot of publication credits. I like helping new writers. I had a lot of help when I first got started, and so I like to kind of pay it forward, though it's been over 20 some years now, and I think maybe I can stop. But I'm really excited to be the judge for the short story contest for Saints and Sinners because it's primarily a lot of new writers and fresh young voices, and that'll be a little bit different because that'll be a little bit different because Paul and Amy, I know, will work with the authors that are selected for the anthology to make the stories really, really good. I don't have to work on it. I just have to pick the stories. So that's
Oh,
much, much easier.
oh,
But I
that's
pro
fantastic.
but I will probably also, because I can't help myself, because my mind just shifts into that when I'm reading submissions. It's like, okay, this one would be the third story. This will be the fifth story. This would be the seventh story.
Oh,
These
that's
two go
cool.
together. I try to editing anthologies, I try to, and my idea, the way I view an anthology is even though it's disconnected stories, usually with the same kind of theme. So I think I want the anthology to read kind of like a novel where one story leads into the next story, leads into the next story, leads into the next story, so that you want to keep reading it rather than putting it down. And I don't, anthologies aren't as popular as they used to be, and I don't really understand it because everything's supposed to be fast now. Everyone's attention spans are so short. Well, you can read a short story in 20 minutes and
Totally
put the book
agree.
down and you're done. I love to just read straight through. I hate putting a book down because don't have any more time to read it. And back before I was writing and publishing and editing and all of that stuff, I would read a book straight through. I would just sit down, like a Saturday, I would just pick up a book in the morning, drink it, read it while I was drinking my coffee, eating lunch and stuff until I was finished with it. And it bothers me that I don't have the time to do that anymore. And my memory is not as good as it used to be. So I have to read the last few pages again before I get back into this book because it can be a couple of days now
Yeah,
between when I don't have time to read.
precisely. And I can read multiple books, but
Yeah.
I have to be very focused because then I have to remember, okay, this character Nancy, which of these three books was Nancy in? Because as you say, sometimes it takes me just a minute to kickstart where I left off. I much prefer to read as straight through as possible, just like you do.
Me.
I think it's you get a better feel for the nuance of a story that way.
Well, when you don't break it up, and it's unfortunate no one has the time anymore to read things from beginning to end straight through in one sitting, but you also get caught up in the voice. You're inside the characters' heads. You're really involved in their world. You're stepping back from it, and then you have to go back into it again, maybe 3 or 4 days later, and you have to reacclimate yourself to get back into that same push. And I think that just detracts from the reading experience. At least it
I
does
agree.
for me a little
It-
bit because I used to read Stephen King straight through. I'd buy his book the day it day it came out, went home and just read the whole thing straight through. And now I'm like 20 books behind on Stephen King. You know, you
Greg,
fall.
you certainly hit the nail on the head. Almost every surface in my house is littered with books, and I'm like,
Mm,
and I have a long list of on my to be read list, and it
mhm.
frustrates me. Some days I will be sitting on the couch and a book will call out to me and it says it's my turn now. And whatever
Right.
I'm reading, I set aside and I pick it up because it really is that person or that book's turn. So I like that.
Yeah, I do too. I like to have almost every book in my house is unread because I don't have enough space for all the books that I would have. I used to be a hoarder and keep them all. And now that I'm in my 60s, it's like, oh, someone's going to have to get rid of all of these when I die.
Oh, Greg, you're so much nicer than I am. I'm just like, hey, they can deal with this later. Well, of course, you have Paul, so I mean, that might be something a little nicer. Maybe if I wasn't single, I would care.
But yeah, so now when I read a book, I have a box that goes to the library sale, and when I
Nice,
finish the book, it goes in
nice.
there because I buy more books than I have time to read. And so, but I like that because then I can browse through them when it's time to pick something else to read and
Yes,
find
yeah.
something that speaks to me in that time and space. It's like, oh yeah, I need to read this. This is what I need to read right now.
Absolutely. So, if someone wanted to submit a short story for Saints and Sinners, do they go to sasfest.org, the
I
Saints and
believe,
Sinners website?
I think so. I believe the submission you submit through the website. I'm not
Okay.
sure exactly how that works, but I because I probably should pay more attention when Paul talks to me about things. But yeah, I believe it's an electronic submission. You go to the website, and either the form, the system of uploading it is there, or a link to go to where you can upload it
Okay,
is on the
perfect.
website.
And what are you looking for, a particular link? Are you looking for any flash fiction or only short stories?
It's just short stories, yeah,
Okay, perfect.
and it's a and it can be they can be on any topic. I think the 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 call on the website will say it, but I don't think the only thing is it has to be queer. There
Yep,
has to be a
I
queer.
think it's queer, and I think also it's suggested that it features saints and sinners in some capacity within the story. I don't think it's
Yeah,
a requirement; it's a suggestion. So,
I don't think you have to actually reference. I don't know. I haven't read the rules. I should probably. I think Paul asked me to do it, and I know when the stories are due, and it's like, all right, I'll figure this out when I
there
need.
you go. There you go. I love it. Greg, do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
My website is gregherren.net, and I believe my social media is usually either Greg H121 on the Twittery type things. I think I'm on 3.
All right.
It's either Scotty Nola or Greg H121 on Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads,
Okay.
X. And
Perfect.
and I also have an author page on Facebook. You can find it's facebook.com/Greg Herren.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a great chat. I appreciate it very much.
Well, I had a good time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.